On the terror watch tonight, people around the world are mourning the deaths of two people killed in a terror attack in Denmark. The gunman has been identified as an ISIS follower, Omar el-Hussein. He was shot and killed. The world was also watching as ISIS released yet another propaganda video, this time showing militants beheading 21 Egyptian Coptic Christians in Libya. It sent red flags to people around the world that ISIS is gaining ground and is no longer limiting its attacks to Iraq and Syria. But its followers have spread to Yemen, Afghanistan, Libya, even Pakistan. Egypt responded to the beheadings by launching an air offensive against the group. This as Congress considers approving President Obama's proposed authorization for the use of increased military force against ISIS. That request calls for a 3-year military assault on the terror group. It would also allow limited ground operations and the flexibility for the military to confront unforeseen circumstances, which could include the sending of special forces. The debate on Capitol Hill could take months. Former House Speaker John Boehner and former CIA Director and Defense Secretary Leon Panetta also weighing in.
I've always believed that we should give the authority to the president to win the battles that we need to win. And I don't believe that the authorization the president asked for will give him the tools he needs to defeat ISIL. You know, he says, well, the threat is being diminished. Well, the fact is, ISIL continues to gain new territory.
We're dealing with an enemy that is well-funded. We're dealing with an enemy that has strong command and control. And we're dealing with an enemy that is well-armed. And as a result of that, I think that they can conduct the kind of offensive operations that can be very effective and that have to be met tooth and nail with everything we've got. That's the reality. ISIS is a whole new chapter in terms of the terrorist threat to that area and to our country.
A new series of polls show where the American public stands on all of this. A new CNN ORC poll says 78% of Americans believe that Congress should give President Obama the authority to continue to use military force against ISIS. Just 21% say it should not. But that number drops down to 47% who say they're in favor of the U.S. sending in ground troops into combat operations against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. 50% of people in the United States oppose the move. So what does it take to defeat ISIS? Well, since the rest of us can't figure out how to capture a territory in a game of Risk, we're going to bring in Mike Lyons. Mike is a former Army captain who served in Iraq. He's also a military analyst for CBS News Radio and a senior fellow at the Truman National Security Project in Washington. Mike, welcome back. Thanks for being here.
Great, Andrew.
So what kind of commitment would we be looking at if we wanted to totally defeat ISIS?
Okay, so the president is going down this track with this campaign right now, getting other nations involved in this coalition, leading really from behind. But if we were to defeat ISIS, what it's going to take? About 100,000 soldiers on the ground. They don't have to be United States soldiers, but about 100,000 ground troops to stabilize first Iraq, get that situation, get that border restored, and then likely fight a very bloody conventional battle inside of Syria, and then get that government going on as well. But about, I'd say, 100,000 of total combined troops working together.
And what happens after, let's say, the military battle is over? Because just like we faced in Iraq, we managed to topple the government there pretty quickly, but we stayed another decade.
Right, and so part of the political solution has got to be, what does Phase 5 look like? What does the end game look like? What exactly does the government is going to be in place? We have a quasi-situation in Iraq right now. We can argue whether or not that's going to survive. There's none of that inside of Syria right now. You had the president say that Assad has to go, and now he's backtracked on that as well. Syria, I think, is more of a deeper problem that has to be solved.
It sounds like you're saying we really don't know what it would take, maybe not for the military victory at first, but to then keep the momentum or to stop everything from sliding back into the chaos it's in now. Do we know what it would take?
Well, I mean, the same thing happens in Libya. If we don't, you know, we went in and we changed the government there, and now you have a civil war taking place, and this is where these forces like ISIS, Al-Qaeda can now come in, Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb can come in underneath and gain legitimacy with the people there. So in terms of what it's going to take all of those coordinated effects. First, the military effect to defeat this enemy, get them to put their arms down, and then create governments and create the stability of the environments going forward.
Jeannie, 100,000 American ground troops, that's what Mike says it would take to win in Iraq and to win in Syria over ISIS. Is there enough sentiment, is there enough support from the American people to do that or even come close to doing that?
I don't think so. And you know, and I hear what Mike's saying. He's saying 100,000. It doesn't have to be American. It could be combined coalition troops. And that's where I think the president is headed, because I don't think Americans, as much as you look at public opinion polls, which on foreign policy issues are very difficult to really believe, but when you look at them, as much as people say we need to do more or we can send in ground troops, even to a minor degree, they're not going to want to commit us to troops in the Middle East at that rate for 5, 10, 15 years, whatever it's going to take, more than we've been there already.
Dom, is this something where the White House could, let's say, campaign for it and try to win hearts and minds in the U.S. and actually make a difference?
No, there's no way the Americans would go for this. The only possible scenarios, if something, and God forbid this happened, something happened very bad to Americans somewhere in the world, and that might change the dynamics. But after Iraq, after Afghanistan, Americans want nothing to do with this. It's as simple as that. And the president knows it. That's why every initiative he puts forward is very limited foots on the ground.
Mike, can we do this with drones and missiles? Can we do this with just dipping our toe into the water on this?
No, I'm afraid not. I mean, we've assembled the greatest, drone military really in the history of the world already. It's a standoff military in that it strikes from over the horizon. But you go back to the times of the Roman legions, and they'll tell you that until you're willing to put your soldiers, your youth in the mud to take and hold that ground from a military perspective, you'll never have it.
All right, so if we can't get the political support back here at home to get us to what we think the military solution would be, 100,000 troops, assuming that it's all just American troops, is there a halfway that we can go on this? Is there any way we can attack them to the point where they're less of an issue, less of a threat for the region?
Sure. Containment, I think, is the president's first mission, and he got in trouble for saying that initially. Now he's been saying destroy it. But from a military perspective, contain is really the first mission. I think that we need to put logisticians and supply chains and start increasing that capability inside of Iraq right now. There's places to the north of where ISIS is currently at that we can kind of get behind, get in their kind of rear area of operation, so to speak, from a military perspective, and then be what's called an anvil to a situation that once the Iraqi military gets moving, as they try to force ISIS out through Iraq, that they become like a blocking force in order to do that. Now that would be small combat troops plus, again, supply lines and things like that. But those are the kind of things that I think that the president should be doing, and I know he's getting that kind of advice from his military chiefs now.
Doesn't that really put American troops, though, right smack in the middle of difficulties from both sides? I mean, doesn't that basically put a bullseye on American troops?
I mean, the troops that are there have it on their backs anyway. I mean, when the president says there's no military solution there, we have 5,000 troops there already. We have people every day in harm's way. You saw the situation last week in the town of al-Baghdadi attacking the Assad air base. There's 300 Marines there. They're safe, so to speak, but they will fight should they have to fight. I mean, they're in a war zone. They get that.
What about the idea of getting other nations involved? I mean, we've seen the Jordanians saying that they want to take an increased role after the murder of one of their pilots. The Egyptians are now launching their own airstrikes. We've seen UAE, I think, starting to get a little more involved. Is there enough momentum, and would there be enough willing partners to actually help in this?
Yeah, Andrew, it's not only momentum, it's numbers, it's capability. All of those countries have capable militaries, but they're just so small. There's only about 80,000, let's say, within the Jordanian military. That's total. That's not all even the combatants. You've got a large, what's called tooth-to-tail ratio. You would need the Egyptian military involved, the Israeli army. How would you like to see Israelis fighting alongside Egyptian military attacking inside of Syria? I mean, when you think about that scenario, that's possibly something that could happen.
I think that would be
just one quick question. I know you got to move on, Andrew, but I'm just curious, why wouldn't an airstrike or airstrikes, why wouldn't that work alone?
Right now, we're doing what's called effects-based targeting. What that means is we're going after specific military targets that we're sure are going to get a military solution. In the old days of warfare, let's say World War II, we would say, enemies here, 5 square miles, we're going to attack, and we're going to blow it all up. We had tremendous collateral damage. We destroyed infrastructure. In today's world, the world won't tolerate that. We'll kill many civilians. And so we'll keep doing this effects-based targeting until something changes.
And Mike, I'm hearing from a lot of people who are saying, why are we getting in the middle of another Middle Eastern conflict? I mean, these people, they were fighting before we were there. They'll be fighting after we're gone. Is there any way this gets resolved without the U.S.?
Well, here's my advice for politicians on the stump trying to explain that to people in the middle of Idaho or in Iowa. We're fighting really alongside our allies. We owe to the Jordanians and to the Egyptians, to the Saudis. These are our allies, and if we run from them now, which ISIS poses an existential threat to them, if we run from them now, it doesn't say much for what our European allies would think about us. So this is really about that. ISIS does not pose this existential threat to the U.S. It does to our allies.
Let me go back to the political side. Does this use of force resolution get passed? Does the president get what he's looking for, Dominic?
It's a good question. Republicans seem
That's
to
why
be
I
for
asked
it. Democrats are skittish and seem like they're running from it. At the end of the day, I believe it will pass.
Jeannie?
I think it will pass, but I think it's going to be a very important debate that we're going to hear about where, in fact, both parties, and it's going to be a lot about 2016, where they stand on this issue. You know, you've got Republicans saying they want the president to ask for more, and Democrats, as Dominic mentioned, very skittish about the entire issue. So it's going to be, I think, a roadmap to what these candidates are going to be saying in 2016.
Mike, as a military guy, when you hear things like this is all going to get colored by the next presidential election, how creepy does that sound for military folks?
Well, you know, the president is the commander-in-chief, and we have to abide by, from a military side, you have to abide by that directive. I think this force authorization kind of split the baby. Look, the president can get up any day and go to war anytime he wants. He can't stay at war, but he can go to war. He can change his mind anytime he wants. What he's doing is I think, the very minimal to get Congress involved, get them in the game, to make sure that if a pilot goes down in Syria, we'll rescue him. All of those things that are important that the commander-in-chief does.
Mike Lyons, military analyst, and I'm assuming expert risk player as well.
Well, no, I'm not sure about risk, but sure.
Thanks very much for being here. And we want you at home to sound off on this. Head to Facebook, head to Twitter, sound off on today's question. Do you support sending in American ground troops to help in the fight against ISIS? Up next, we're going to turn to New York, where Governor Cuomo's hand is being forced. Federal judge has ordered the governor to hold a special election to fill Michael Grimm's seat, not in November, but right now. We'll be back after a quick break.